We're back. It's lesson 7B, Understanding United States Budget Priorities. In your preview, you had Megan's time budget for a 24-hour day, and it showed that she puts more time into her schoolwork. And let me get my pen started. Sorry about that. More time in her schoolwork than in her current job. Her budget may reflect a higher value on preparation for the future than on her short-term needs. Budgets say something about our values. The more important items receive more resources than the less important items. Question number 1. This is the time to hit pause, answer question number 1, and then come back. But it's asking, what is a budget? How can you use a budget? What do percentages of money spent for different items in a budget tell you about priorities? Your answers are going to vary on this. One of the ideas is that the higher the percentages, the higher percentages may indicate higher priorities. Keep in mind we're getting ready for your next test, and we talked about in a video earlier that if you're not happy with your test grade, you've got to do something different, or the test grade's going to, in all likelihood, continue to be the same. If you like your test grade, then keep doing what you had been doing, and it could be some things along the lines of starting a glossary or flashcards or a Google document, but something where you're remembering concepts, how to process the concepts, and their definitions. So starting here with the objectives, what we're going to do in this lesson is that we're going to eventually understand the meaning and use of part to part and part to whole ratios. That part to whole ratios can be used to create pie graph. Wait, well, which one? Part to whole. Also, the meaning of percentages is going to depend on context. When we get done with this lesson, we're going to be able to use part to part ratios, part to whole ratios, and percentages to calculate ratios to compare line items in budgets. We're going to use ratios, we're going to use percentages, we're going to construct a pie graph, and we're going to examine and interpret ratios, percentages, and pie graphs. The spreadsheet for this lesson contains the 2012 United States federal budget. Each row is a line item. A line item. It's a spending category. The data tell you how much money in millions of dollars was spent on each line item in 2012. In the previous assignment, you were asked to look up the meaning of each line item, and now we're going to analyze and compare the amount of money allocated in each line item. So if you have not hit pause yet, go ahead and hit pause. You could do questions 2 all the way through 7, but at least do questions 2 through 4, and then come back and we'll do these together. So let's look at question 2 together. Write down the following ratios using the 2012 federal budget data. Here's 2012, here's the 2012, and here are some line items. Part A wants us to do national defense to the total. Again, I really encourage you to write some words or letters, like we're going to do national defense to the total budget. That's going to help me to know that for national defense, I'm going to go here, which is in millions of dollars, and I'm going to put 677,852 million. And then for the total, I'm going to put right here 3,537,127 million. So far, all it's asking us to do is to write down the following ratio. So now I'm going to go to Part B. Part B is asking me to write national defense to human resources. National defense to human resources. National defense is still the 677,852, but this is in millions. And again, I'm neglecting my dollar signs. And that's supposed to be written or compared to in a ratio to human resources. And human resources would be right here, which is 2,348,587 million. And that's all they wanted us to do, is to write these two as ratios. But then question 3 says, compare the two ratios. How are they similar? How are they different? So I hope you've already written some thoughts down. If not, hit pause, write down a couple of thoughts. One of the first things I noticed is that both involve the national defense spending. That's a similarity, but the first one is a part to the whole, the total. And in the second one, it's a part to a part. I'm going to stay here on this screen while we go through questions 4, 5, 6, and 7. And again, if you have not already written down answers for questions 4, 5, 6, and 7, please press pause and write down some answers and then come back and let's work through those together. Question 4, I've already alluded to and actually already answered that there are two types of ratios, part-to-part ratios and part-to-whole. For the two ratios we wrote down in our question 2, which one's part-to-part and which one is part-to-whole. And I've already noted that this one's part-to-part and this one was part-to-whole when we did national defense to the total budget. It asks a question of what do you think is the difference. Jot down some thoughts. Thoughts could be similar to that part B is a part-to-part ratio because we're comparing the two parts, but part A is a part-to-whole because we're comparing one part of a line item to the total. And the difference is whether the denominator, let me get right here, whether the denominator is the total or whether the denominator is another part. Question 5, what do these ratios tell you about the federal budget priorities? Which of these ratios helps you to understand federal budget priorities better and why? A lot of opinions here, a lot of different things you can write down, and you should take time to observe, process, and write down some information. But like part B, on part B, it could be more helpful because when you're comparing two parts, you start to see and that needs to go away, sorry. You start to see that this amount as compared to this amount, there's a whole lot more being spent on human resources than there is on national defense when you start comparing part to part. But there is value when you're looking at what is a part as compared to the whole, especially when you want to look at this line item and then another line item and you can compare between the two. There is value in going both directions. Question 6, though, for the ratio that you did not find as helpful in question 5, what additional information could you use to make the ratio more helpful? And it's just going to depend on which way you like. Do you like the part to whole better? Do you like the part to part better? And I think it's going to depend on what you're trying to convey to your audience. I talk a lot of time in class about when you're doing a presentation, you want to give information that addresses the needs of your audience. And your audience might be needing to know how things relate to the whole. Your audience might need to know how do the items relate to each other. So know your audience. Sorry, I keep dragging this down low and you keep getting a whole lot more than what we need here. Now I don't know how to make it go away. Go away. It won't go away. Oh, it went away. So finally, question 7 says, of those two ratios that you wrote down in question 2, which would make the most sense converted to a percentage and why? This is a place you really need to pause and think on and reflect. A percentage is a part of a whole. A percentage is you have a quantity of something and you want to know what percent of it that you're talking about. So to answer the question, part A is the one that we display that's a part of a whole, and written as a percentage, we would know that what percentage of the total budget is dedicated, in this case, to national defense spending. Make a huge note in your notes. We're going to be converting percentages from part to whole ratios. I'm going to keep staying on this pretty messy screen, and I need you to go ahead and hit pause and look at your questions 8 and 9. You can go ahead and look at 10 and 11, but right now for sure questions 8 and 9, and then come back to this recording. Question 8 says calculate the percentages of those ratios given in question 2. So I'm still sitting here at question 2. I'm going to try to find a whole other color, and I'm going to go back here to the part and the whole, and I'm going to punch in divide 677,852 by 3,537,127. And when I divide and then multiply by 100, it's not asking me or telling me where to round. So I'm just going to go ahead and round to the nearest whole percent. And I'm getting that the national defense is 19% of the whole budget. We're going to go on over here because I sat right here for just a little bit and said we're going to do part to whole because that's going to make the most sense, this part to whole percentage. But it's asking us, go ahead and calculate what's going on down here. So I'm going to do 677,852 and divide it this time by the human resources amount, which is 2,348,587. And a reminder, this is all in millions of dollars. And when I divide and then multiply by 100, I'm going to go ahead and round again to the nearest whole number, and I'm getting 29%. But a thing that you have to keep in mind is 29% of what? So question 8 says calculate the percentages, round each to the nearest whole. It did say, it would be good if I read the directions. Write a contextual sentence to interpret the percentages. So let's go back to this part to whole, part A. This is what the federal government has allocated, and they allocated 19% of the total 2012 budget to defense spending. So almost 20% of the entire budget has gone toward national defense. Now this is the one we got to be careful on. Part B, how can we interpret what we just got? Because this is not being compared to the whole, it's being compared to something else. National defense is compared to human resources. So a comment that we could make is that national defense spending, the national defense spending is only 29% of the human resource spending. Take a second to think on this of how the pieces and parts are presented differently, worded differently, and their meanings are different based on who our reference value is, either the total or a part. So now you're looking at question 9. If you haven't already stopped to do question 9, it is going to ask us for each line item in the spreadsheet to create a part to whole ratio and calculate the percentage for the ratio, part to whole. Round to the nearest whole percentage point and be sure that we get a sum of 100%. And then they're going to ask us to create a pie chart and talk about spending and answers and policies. But first, we need to do some calculations and then create a pie chart. Again, if you haven't done questions 9, 10, and 11 by yourself, pause and do those first, and then come back and join me at question 9. I've gone into my math lab and I've pulled from the spreadsheets the one that is for 7B in class, and this is what is there. It's available to you also. So what you're about to do, you can do by hand, you can do it through the Excel spreadsheet. You need to know how to do this using your own calculator. A spreadsheet can make it faster as long as we know what to tell it that we need it to do. And in this case, I'm wanting it to calculate the percentage of national defense as compared to the total budget. So I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to go grab B4, that's my national defense spending, and divide it by B, let me go ahead and lock that in with a $sign, 10. This is already understood to be in decimal form, and so when I hit return, I'm at 19%. However, they're asking us to round to the nearest whole number, and so I'm going to call this one 19, or whole percent. A nice little trick that we can do is we can drag down the corner. I went back up here. Oh, it's already done it. And when I drag down and let go, it's going to do all the calculations for me. I'm going to go ahead and do the rounding as it said. I'll do it by hand. And I'm getting a 6%, 6%, 5, and interestingly, a -3%. It did mention that all of these should add up to be 100%. We have rounded, so it's probably going to be off a little bit, but let's go ahead and ask it to equals sum what we've got going on from E4 all the way down to E9, and it tells us we're at 99%. And the rounding, I've lost several pieces with 2/10, 4/10, and if I added these up in the column D, it should probably be 100%. But this is very good and very close, so we're going to go with it. Question number 10 says, consider your answers in 8 and 9 and create a pie graph of the part to whole percentages. That's what we just did. All of these were to the total, to the whole. So I'm going to go over here and hold down my right click. I'm going to hit Control and then do this one more time so that I highlight all of the pieces from the words of the line items and the percentages rounded to the nearest whole number. I'm going to click Insert and go to Recommended Charts, and then probably a pie chart will pop up, and there it is. And looking at this, I can add a chart title, I can add information, I can do all sorts of things to it. But for right now, I just want to do question 10. It says, consider these answers and create a pie graph of the part to whole. And what you're going to notice is 66%. That's a lot for our human resources. And you look here, and when you look at the graph, 2/3 of the graph of the budget is for human resources. The next large piece, it's going to be national defense, but it pales in comparison, if you will. It's much smaller than the one for human resources. We then have some more pieces on here, but then what did they do with this -3? Let me go ahead and hit pause, and I'll show you a possible answer for looking at this -3. This is the example of the budget that's included with our curriculum and in the answers. It's not exactly 100% accurate, and looking right here, yep, I knew it was going to do it. Like this is supposed to be 66%, but it's another way to look at this as we finish up question 10. Question 10 says, where's the most spending? It is definitely going to be in the human resources. It's definitely evident by all of this shaded portion, which is almost, or is 2/3 of the pie chart. The most spending is human resources, and it represents 66% of the budget. Where's the least spending? And then this is where it gets a bit interesting, where we start noticing that other functions, that's a 5% sliver. But then this undistributed offsetting receipts is actually a -3. So that would be some really good conversation as to, well, do we actually put it in there? It's not really a positive, but it's part of the whole budget. That's why I wanted to show you this one, because I made the other one using Excel. Here's another example of a pie chart. Bottom line, looking at question 11. What do your answers to questions 8, 9, and 10 tell you about government priorities in 2012? How did the pie graph help? And then why or why not? And when you look at this, again, in my face-to-face classes, I'm always talking about having a healthy paranoia. You need to be a thinker. You need to think critically. And you don't need to be paranoid, but you need to have a healthy balance where you are looking at what people are telling you, whether it is media, whether it is social media, no matter what it is, have a sense about you where you question and where you look and you listen, because it does seem that national defense, it's like we need to cut the spending, cut the spending. And then when you put it in perspective, it's like, but wait, human resources, that's where we're spending the large bulk of our money. Anyway, it gives you conversation pieces, and it helps you to talk more intelligently about issues going on in our world right now and in our nation. So, with that in mind, question 11 again says, what do your answers tell you about government priorities? Human resources are by far the priority. Is that good, bad, indifferent? And then how did the pie graph help? It made it very obvious. And why or why not? And then you could also say, over here it's a little confusing, it's a little weird, so I like the pie graph because of this, but I don't like it because of that. And again, know your audience and what are you trying to communicate in a presentation or whatever it is you might be using a pie graph for. So this concludes Lesson 7B. Check your calendar to see if you have more lessons that are due this week and either keep going with videos or stop and do some homework.